Welcome to the educational webinar for the Standard of Practice Record Keeping. We are going to be covering quite a lot of information in this session. We'll begin by discussing the implementation date for this standard and how to prepare for it. I will introduce the standard and explain its purpose. We'll go through each of the 7 standard statements and supplement your understanding with interactive practice scenarios. I will show you where you can access the references to the materials used to develop the standard. I will provide you with the contact information in case you have any questions or concerns. And finally, I will show you the information needed to enter your CPD credits. The Standard of Practice for Record Keeping went into effect on January 1st, 2017. All members should have read the standard and the guide. Attending webinars is optional, however, it helps you to understand your professional obligations. Same with completing the self-directed learning assignments. Finally, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to contact a college representative. Under the RHPA, all regulatory colleges are required to develop and maintain standards of practice. The Professional Misconduct Regulation actually states that it is an act of professional misconduct if a member fails to maintain a standard of practice. Failing to keep records as outlined in the standard, falsifying a record, signing or issuing a document that the denturist knows is false or misleading, collecting, using, and disclosing information without patient consent, and failing to make arrangements for the timely transfer of a patient's record when required, all would constitute professional misconduct under the Denturist Act of 1991 and may result in college proceedings. This standard of practice for record keeping incorporates certain information from the misconduct regulation. This ensures that members are complying with both the standard and the regulations. Standards of practice are a validated set of expectations that contribute to public protection. The standards define the expectations for the profession, communicate to the public the denturist's accountability, and guide the denturist's practice. Documentation and maintaining records is a key component of a denturist's practice. Documentation, whether paper, electronic, or digital, is used to provide evidence of service, monitor treatment plans, support the recall of information, and identify who did what and when. This standard of practice explains the regulatory expectations for documentation and record keeping. It takes into account applicable legislation and regulations that impact denturism practice. To help denturists understand their legal and professional obligations, the content is presented as a set of standard statements which describe a broad practice principle. Each standard statement is followed by a corresponding performance indicator that explains how a denturist would meet the standard when documenting and maintaining records. This standard is replacing the record-keeping policy from the professional guide. However, there isn't really anything new in the standard that wasn't in the policy. The standard just elaborates and provides more information than the policy did. Information captured in the record can be used for many purposes. For example, to provide evidence of service, so a timeline of events, monitor treatment plans, which allows you to review the progress of a treatment plan and make adjustments as necessary. It supports the recall of information, and it would be fantastic if we could all remember everything that we did and said on a daily basis, but that's not realistic. Record keeping provides you with the opportunity to review past discussions, appointments, and treatment plans. Finally, it allows you to identify who did what and when. Similar to the point we just made, record keeping helps you answer who, what, where, when, why, how, and how much. Documentation is also important for legal purposes. For example, if you needed to provide a patient record for the purposes of a civil court case. It's important for the continuity of patient care. So if the patient needs to be referred to another healthcare practitioner, the other practitioner will understand the patient's case. It's important for accountability. by ensuring that members are meeting their professional obligations and responsibilities. And it's also important for quality assurance. Documentation can also be used for the purposes of self-reflection and quality assurance. Let's talk about what that means. As mandated by the RHPA, healthcare practitioners should be engaging in self-assessment as part of the quality assurance program. During this assessment, members reflect on their own practice to determine what they're doing well and what they could possibly be doing better. The record audit exercise that have been put together for you allows members to review some of their charts to evaluate their record-keeping practices against the standard. After the audit, members should be able to identify the areas of record keeping that they are doing well and the areas that require more attention. Another component of the quality assurance program is the peer and practice assessment. Some of you are familiar with this process if you've been selected for an assessment before. There's a section of the assessment report that looks at record keeping practices. As part of this assessment process, the peer assessor goes into your clinic and reviews some charts to ensure that the member is meeting these requirements. This is a great time to ask your peer assessor questions if you have any regarding record-keeping best practices and documentation. You're expected to meet the standards of practice and document your rationale to support any deviation from this standard. The patient record should provide a clear understanding of the patient goals, the plan of care, the services provided, the cost of those services, an evaluation, and outcomes. If a member deviates from the standard, they should document their rationale to support that deviation. There are a number of performance indicators that speak to standard statement number 1. We're not going to get into all of them in this session, but we will highlight some that may need clarification. The record is only as good as the information contained within it. In order to provide the maximum amount of information, documentation should be accurate, clear, concise, and present a comprehensive picture of the services that were provided and any advice that was given. The documentation should be organized, logical, and systematic. This will help you retrieve information quickly and easily. Documentation should be legible and written in English or in French. As you know, Canada's 2 official languages are English and French. Therefore, your records need to be written in at least one of these languages. You are more than welcome to communicate in the language that best serves your patient and even have a copy of the record in another language if that assists you. The documentation should include the information required to identify the record and support continuing care. In other words, each page of the record should contain a unique identifier so that it can be matched up with a correct patient. We'll talk more about unique identifiers in the following practice scenario. A denturist sent the records of a client to a dental office. Karen, the receiving party, noticed that the denturist sent records from another client who has the same last name, and some records do not identify a client. So Karen is not sure if the unidentified records are for the referred client. What documentation practice would have prevented confusion? A. The date and nature of all patient interactions, including patient service related to any repairs and/or adjustments made. B. A unique identifier on every part or page of the patient record. Or C. The patient's name, address, and date of birth is contained in the record. The correct answer is B. A unique identifier on every part or page of the patient record. Denturists should clearly note the unique identifier and date on all multimedia data, including patient pictures, images, models, emails, videos, etc. A unique identifier could be an assigned patient number or a combination of the patient's full name and birth date. It is possible for patients to have the same name, so we suggest using more than just a name to identify your records. In this practice scenario, Ken files a complaint with the college claiming he did not attend one of his scheduled fitting visits. However, Ken claims he was charged for this visit. The college reviews the client's medical records as part of the investigation. Several concerns were noted in the medical record, including the reason for the canceled appointment was noted by an unknown person. The entry was only signed by their initials. The entry documenting the reason was dated several months after the scheduled appointment, and several entries were scratched out and no longer visible. The denturist explains that he employs several receptionists. One of the receptionists must have made the unknown entry, and the reason for the scratched out entry is that the receptionist documented information in the wrong chart. What documentation practices would support the denturist's claims? A. Maintains a master signature list if initials are used to attest the records. B. Documents information about any procedure that was commenced but not completed and the reason for the non-completion. C. Documents in a timely manner and completes documentation during or soon after the services or event. D. Corrects and initials errors while ensuring the original information is visible or retrievable. Or E. All of the above. The correct answer is E. All of the above. Maintains a master signature list if initials are used to attest the records. The master signature list does not have to be kept in each record. This may be helpful but not required. The denturist should have the list stored somewhere that is easily accessible by the staff of the clinic that have access to the patient records. Documents information about any procedure that was commenced but not completed and the reason for the non-completion. You don't have to write up a long story, but just a few notes to provide a timeline of events is appropriate. Documents in a timely manner and completes documentation during or soon after the services or event. It's always better to complete your documentation sooner rather than later. This ensures that you will not forget any important and relevant details. Corrects and initials errors while ensuring the original information is visible or retrievable. As previously mentioned, it is important to convey accuracy and accountability in your record keeping. I would like to take a minute now to highlight this performance indicator. Here are some key things to keep in mind when a patient requests a change to their record. The denturist makes changes to the record if he or she agrees that the information is incomplete or inaccurate within 30 days from receipt of the request. The denturist documents the request and the rationale for the change. The denturist is not obligated to make changes to records he or she believes are accurate or complete. This is particularly true when the entry contains an evaluative component or an expression of professional opinion. In the event of changes not made, the denturist should attach a statement of disagreement reflecting the correction requested. The denturist gives notice of every correction made and every statement of disagreement attached to the patient record to every person and/or organization to which the record was disclosed during the 12 months preceding the date the correction was requested. Here's another practice scenario. Doug booked an initial appointment with Karen, a denturist, for the fabrication of a partial upper denture. As a result of a motor vehicle accident, Doug has 3 missing teeth on the upper right side. Prior to the accident, Doug had a tooth extracted on the upper right side. The plan of care addresses all 4 missing teeth with a partial replacement. Karen prepares an insurance claim form for Doug to provide to his insurer. While in the denturist's office, Doug reviews the form and notices that his birth date is inaccurate and asks Karen to correct it. He also asks Karen to remove the information that one of the missing teeth is from a previous dental treatment. How should Karen handle this situation? A. Correct the birth date and change the history note, as Doug has a right to request these changes. B. Refuse to make any changes to the record as Karen is the custodian of the record. Or C. Correct the birth date and explain to Doug that changing the history notes is unacceptable. The correct answer is C. Correct the birth date and explain to Doug that changing the history notes is unacceptable. Under the Personal Health Information Protection Act, also known as PHIPAA, Doug has the right to request a change in information captured in the insurance form. However, Karen is obligated to apply her professional judgment. Karen would correct inaccurate information, such as the error in the patient's birth date. However, Karen is not obligated to make changes to factual information or her professional opinion. Modifying a record or omitting information that the denturist believes is part of his or her professional opinion or assessment, or is misleading, may be seen as fraudulent, as it would be in this situation. You can find more information in the Your Health Information, Your Access and Corrections Rights, published by the Information and Privacy Commission of Ontario. The link to this document can be found at the end of the standard under the References section. Standard Statement Number 2. Records maintained in electronic form meet the standard of practice, regulations, and legislation. This standard statement may not apply to all practitioners. However, if you do have electronic records, please pay close attention to this statement as well as the performance indicators. Ensures individual patient records are easily retrievable. Whichever system you're using, you should be able to search for and review records easily. This is where the unique identifier can come in very handy. For example, you can search your system by a file or a patient number. Takes reasonable steps to ensure that records maintained in electronic form are secure from loss, tampering, interference, or unauthorized use or access. This is very important. Think about how careful you are with your own personal information, health and other. As a healthcare practitioner, you are obligated to protect the information you are storing physically and electronically. This could be done by ensuring that information is password protected and encrypted, and that only those who are authorized have access. Confirms the system maintains an audit trail that, at a minimum, records the date and time of each entry of each patient, shows any changes to the record, and preserves the original content when a record is changed, updated, or corrected. This ensures accountability and assists in preventing fraud. Ensures regular off-site backup and/or automatic backup for file recovery to protect records from loss or damage. Just as with physical files, it is possible to lose electronic files. For example, your computer systems may go down. It's vital that you're able to recover any information that may be lost or damaged. If documents are scanned and maintained in an electronic form, the original paper copy may be securely destroyed. The key point here is securely. It isn't enough to just throw the paper in the garbage or recycling. In fact, there are several companies that offer secure shredding services. Standard Statement Number 3. Records are collected, maintained, shared, and disclosed in a secure and confidential manner in accordance with applicable legislation and regulations. The Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario has published some very helpful fact sheets when it comes to collecting, maintaining, sharing, and disclosing health information in a secure and confidential manner. Several of these documents are listed in the References section of this standard, and it might be helpful if you read those documents on your own for more information. The Standard of Practice for Confidentiality and Privacy went into effect on January 1st, 2018. This standard and the accompanying guide can also provide you with more information. A custodian is a person or organization with custody or control over personal health information as a result of or in connection with performing the person's or organization's powers or duties. An agent is any person who is authorized by a health information custodian to perform services or activities on the custodian's behalf. The physical patient record is owned and held by the denturist, known as the custodian, but the information contained in the record is owned by the patient. Therefore, denturists are highly accountable to ensure information is accurate, secure, and kept from unauthorized access. Denturists also have an obligation to know the patient's rights with regards to accessing records in accordance with applicable laws. John owns a denturism clinic and a mobile service. He employs 2 other denturists, a receptionist, and an RDT. Who is the custodian and who are the agents? In this scenario, John is the custodian and all of the other employees are the agents. Therefore, the 2 other denturists, the receptionist and the RDT, would be considered agents of the record. Here's a practice scenario. Sharon, a denturist employed by John, the owner of the denture clinic, lost a USB device, which contained the patient files from the mobile practice. Sharon tells John that she did not know how to password protect the memory stick. What must John do in this situation? A. Notify all patients that their medical record has been lost and share the actions that will be taken to recover the information. B. Train all staff on security and confidentiality policies. C. Report the situation to the College of Denturists of Ontario. D. A and B, or E, A and C? The correct answer is D, A and B. A says that a denturist must notify all patients that their medical records have been lost and share the actions that will be taken to recover the information. It's very important to communicate what has happened with the patients who were affected. PHIPAA requires that healthcare practitioners notify individuals whose health information has been stolen or compromised, and as of October 1st, 2017, denturists must also report if there's a privacy breach to the Privacy Commissioner. B says that you must train all staff on security and confidentiality policies. Staff must understand the process of what to do, who to notify, and when to do it. This could avoid some hefty fines. For example, individuals could be fined $100,000 and organizations could be fined up to $500,000 for breaches in privacy. Custodian responsibilities. Custodians must ensure the physical security of all records and personal information. They also must put in place security systems on electronic devices, including passwords, user IDs, encryption, firewall, and virus scans. Custodians must train staff on security and confidentiality policies, notify the patients whose personal health information has been compromised, and notify the Privacy Commissioner if there's been a privacy breach. Finally, custodians must display the privacy and confidentiality policy and ensure it's visible to the public, act as or appoint a privacy officer, and regularly audit the practice for compliance with security policies and confidentiality agreements. However, there is shared accountability amongst custodians and agents. Denturists must take reasonable steps to ensure the security of information when transporting patient records or information, for example, moving from one office to another, bringing patient files home, or transporting them in a vehicle. There was an example last year where a nurse from Durham region lost a USB key that contained the personal health information for over 80,000 patients while she was walking from her office building to her car. The patients whose information was breached have the ability to file a lawsuit against the organization that the nurse worked for. And as you can imagine, this is a very costly and time-consuming issue for the practitioner, the organization, and the patients. Denturists are responsible for ensuring that all information is kept secure and access is limited to authorized personnel only. This is important for both physical and electronic records. For electronic records, you should ensure that documents are password protected, use encryption, back up your computer systems, log on and off of your computers between use. For physical records, you should ensure that they are filed in locked cabinets. You also may want to pay attention to the physical access of your records. So are your records accessible by those in your waiting room? Here's another practice scenario. Robert, a denturist, is asked to present some of his interesting cases at an upcoming conference. He will anonymize the client information and only show pictures of the client's mouth, ensuring the client is unrecognizable. Can Robert use the client information in this manner? A, yes, because Robert has anonymized the personal information. Or B, no, Robert has not obtained the client's permission to use the client information for this purpose. The correct answer is B. No, Robert has not obtained the client's permission to use the client information for this purpose. It's very important to be transparent with your patients in regards to how their information will be used. If Robert had obtained specific permission for that use, he would have been able to use the patient's pictures. Blanket consent is not a good idea, and this refers to having a patient sign a very general consent form regarding the access, use, and disclosure of their personal information. If you'd like to use pictures, for example, it would be best practice to go back to that patient to obtain specific consent for that use. Now let's look at another performance indicator for standard statement number 3. Obtains and documents patient's informed consent prior to the collection, use, storage, and release of information, digital images, and impressions. The two key elements here are obtains and documents. You cannot have one without the other. Even just a short notation in the file is helpful if the record ever needed to be reviewed. Why would a denturist share personal health information with a third party? Well, you might do that in order to provide services or assist in the provision of care. For example, in referral situations, sending information is okay if the patient agrees to the referral. In this case, consent is implied. You may wish to seek legal counsel or insurance advice being sought by the member or required by the member's policy of insurance. For example, if there was a claim made against a member by a patient, the member's insurance company may request patient records. Again, consent is implied here because the patient is initiating the claim. Denturists might have to share information for the purposes of complying with an order by a subpoena or to comply with the RHPA. This could be for the purpose of quality assurance or ICRC discipline or fitness to practice. The lockbox is a term adopted by the healthcare community to refer to a situation when a patient shares information but asks that it be kept out of the patient record. The custodian is required to respect the request of the individual and ensure that no unauthorized collection, use, or disclosure of the information occurs. John, a denturist, meets with Samantha, 19, and her mother. The mother tells John that Samantha flipped over the handlebars of her bicycle and knocked out two of her front teeth. John conducts an assessment and collaborates on a plan of care with Samantha. They schedule several visits for treatment. On the third visit, Samantha arrives without her mother and discloses that she was not in a bicycle accident. Rather, her boyfriend, who she says she's no longer seeing, punched her in the face, knocking out her teeth. Samantha does not want her mother to know what really happened and tells the denturist not to note this in her inpatient record. What actions should John take in this situation? A. Share the information with Samantha's mother. B. Report the situation to Family Child Services. C. Make a notation in the medical record. Or D. Make a notation in the medical record that information has been shared but cannot be disclosed. The correct answer is D. Make a notation in the medical record that information has been shared but cannot be disclosed. This respects the patient request to withhold information in the record. Samantha is capable of making her own decisions and is not in any imminent harm to the denturist's knowledge. Samantha is over the age of 18 and therefore would not be considered a child. She has also indicated that she's no longer seeing the abusive partner and is therefore not in any imminent harm. During the discussion with Samantha, John should explain the importance of sharing this information with relevant people to ensure appropriate care to manage the abuse. For example, Samantha should seek help from friends or family that she trusts and is comfortable with so that she can get the help that she might need. John would also explain how locking this information may affect the dental plan of care. Given the new information, John may require additional assessment data, such as a radiology report, to inform the plan of care. Given that Samantha was hit in the face, specifically her mouth, this is important to keep in mind. The Information and Privacy Commissioner has put out a great fact sheet on the lockbox. The link can be found in the References section of the standard. It describes the type of information that can be locked and from whom they can lock it from. Standard Statement Number 4. Records eligible for destruction are destroyed in a secure and confidential manner. Some indicators for this standard include retains patient records for a period of 7 years, either in paper or electronic form from the date of the last entry. To clarify, this is 7 years total. For example, denturist A is retiring and decides to sell his practice. A patient has not seen denturist A for 2 years. Denturist B purchases this practice. Denturist B would be required to keep the record for another 5 years to equal 7 years in total from the date the patient's last visit to the clinic. Another indicator is to maintain draft notes as a component of the patient record until such time as the notes are transcribed into the record and ensures all data is captured in the record before destruction of the notes. If you jot some notes down on a piece of paper, you must keep those notes as part of the patient record until they are written into the record. Then you can securely destroy the paper. Another indicator is to maintain a copy of the destruction date and the names of the individuals whose records were destroyed. You could, for example, create a record of destruction log. This log would indicate the names of the records that were destroyed as well as the destruction date. This log should be kept indefinitely. Finally, seeks consultation on the secure destruction of multimedia and computer files from a field expert. You need to ensure that no one can recreate the data or information that you're destroying. If you're unsure how to do this, you should seek advice from an IT provider. Standard Statement Number 5. Financial records are kept as part of the patient record or linked by the unique identifier. Again, these are financial records as they pertain to the patient record. We're not referring to bookkeeping practices in this standard statement. In this practice scenario, Ken files a complaint with the college claiming he did not attend one of his scheduled fitting visits. However, Ken claims that he was charged for this visit. The payment schedule was divided into 4 equal payments. What information on the invoice may have prevented a complaint to the college? A, an itemized account of fee charges, B, the payment due dates, or C, the refund policy. The correct answer is A, an itemized account of fee charges. This ensures that a process is in place to provide on request an itemized account of fees charged for professional services, using terminology understood by the public. Try to use simple, straightforward language so that your patients understand what they're paying for and when the payments will be processed. Some indicators for this statement include denturist must issue an invoice which includes the following: the denturist company name, address and phone number, the patient or recipient's name and address, the cost of the item and services, the date and method of payment received, the balance due or owing, and, if applicable, the fees charged by commercial laboratories. The items that are included on the invoice provide a comprehensive summary of the transaction. It summarizes the patient's visit in financial terms. And as with everything, it's important to be transparent and clear with financial records. In regards to complaints, a fair number of complaints come into the college regarding a lack or breakdown of communication. Documenting and communicating the items noted on this slide can go a long way in avoiding a possible complaint. Standard Statement Number 6. All services to, maintenance for, and inspection of equipment and/or instruments are tracked. Let's review a quick practice scenario so that you can see how retaining this information is useful. Rachel, a past client of a denturist, has filed a lawsuit against several of her dental professionals, including the denturist. Rachel claims she obtained hepatitis C from the infected dental instruments. The denturist claims he regularly conducts autoclave testing and ensures all instruments are sterilized prior to use. What records would support the denturist's claim? A. Records of the autoclave testing. B. Infection prevention and control policy. C. Notation in the client's record outlining the routine sterilization procedure followed. D. A and B, or E, B and C. The correct answer is D, A and B. Records of the autoclave testing can come into play during quality assurance, ICRC, and discipline. Therefore, it is critical to keep this information available as backup. The infection prevention and control policy would be helpful so that all clinic staff know the process and have documentation to reference as needed. Some indicators for this standard statement include maintaining an up-to-date record for service to and maintenance for equipment and/or instruments, for example, safety data sheets, autoclave testing, spore testing logs. Another one would be maintaining equipment records for a minimum of 7 years from the date of the last entry, even if the equipment has been discarded. Standard Statement Number 7. Takes reasonable steps when closing the clinic and/or resigning registration to ensure that patients have access to their records. In this practice scenario, Victor, a denturist, is retiring and closing the private practice he owned and operated for the past 35 years. He reads in the college's standards for record keeping that he must make reasonable efforts to inform the patient of the intent to close the clinic and how to access a copy of their records. Victor has paper-based and electronic patient records as well as business accounting records. What should Victor do with the medical records? A. Send all medical records to the college. B. Send all medical records to the Ontario Privacy Commissioner. C. Securely destroy all records. Or D. Securely store or transfer the medical records to another denturist. The correct answer is D. Securely store or transfer the medical records to another denturist. Victor would determine which records he must maintain or transfer to another denturist and how long they must be kept. He would also determine which records he can securely destroy. Again, you can determine which records must be transferred and which can be destroyed by pulling a list of patients and the date of their last visit to the clinic. Victor would consider his options for storing or transferring patient records. There are a lot of third-party vendors out there that offer secure storage for physical and electronic documentation. Victor would inform his patients of the location of their patient records and how to access and/or obtain a copy of their record. This ensures that the patients know where and how to access their personal health information. Finally, Victor would follow government laws related to the maintenance of financial records. In summary, the college suggests that you read the standards posted on our website, access and complete the self-study continuing education materials located on our website, and follow the standards so that you'll meet your professional and legal obligations. Any questions about this standard or any of the other standards of practice can be directed to Jennifer Slobodkin, Manager of Registration, Quality Assurance and Policy, at 416-925-6331, extension 224, or at jslobodkin@denturists-cdo.com. All of the references can be found at the end of the standard.